things from a pretty basic level. Basically, one of the things that was requested kind of as a topic was checkmating patterns. And I think honestly these are kind of interesting. I'm drawing directly from Wikipedia, which I believe is a basically a pretty good source. Sorry, I'm just posting the link in here. I think that the Wikipedia is a pretty good source. And basically, in Wikipedia, there's a total of 35 different checkmates. I was looking through and I didn't know, I mean, I recognized all of them, but I didn't know kind of what these specifically were called. So I thought it might be interesting to go through and set up positions that involve one of each of the patterns and go through. I was very unfamiliar with these names. I mean, there were some that I knew better than others, and there were some that, pretty much all of them had been ones that I'd seen on the board at some point. But I thought they were pretty interesting. So I was just going to go through one by one and take a look at them. This might be a little bit basic, but I actually thought learning the vocabulary here was a pretty cool idea. So yeah, I'm going to be drawing directly off of Wikipedia for this one, and I thought this is pretty interesting. So here, this first one was Anastasia's mate. I was going to set this up on the board. So basically, Anastasia's mate involves a king, a knight, and a rook. So a situation that would involve Anastasia's mate would be like something along this line, where here basically the king can't go to either of the two squares because the knight holds them, and then the rook goes to b8 here. So here, rook to b8, and this is considered to be Anastasia's mate. Rasputin's mate? I'm not sure. I mean, that's the more relevant one, right? What? I don't remember Anastasia really killing anyone, so so Anastasia, Rasputin's might be a little bit more might be a little bit more pressing, but in any case, I would find Rasputin's mate to be more of an intimidating name. So Jen asks this question, and that is an interesting question. Okay. So that's the first one, Anastasia's mate, and the next one is Anderson's mate. Anderson's mate is a different one. This involves basically a rook, checkmating and the king supporting the supporting the escape square. So in this case, something like this, I could see how this could occur potentially. If the king's on h2 and then if there's a rook, a rook basically able to provide tempo and then move to checkmate. But yeah, let's see. In this situation, the king is here, the pawn is here, the opposing king is here, the rook is here, and the rook goes to h4. The king goes to g8, and then the rook checkmates on h8. This is the Anderson's mate. Not one that I was particularly familiar with. So far, we're 2 for 2 in names that I didn't know. But basically, these are different mating patterns. Okay, this one is called the Arabian mate. This one I see all the time. This definitely comes up. Where basically, you have a king that gets forced into the corner with with basically a rook and a knight. So in this case, like the knight basically, the knight goes to f6, threatening the king. The king is blocked from going to f8, and the king instead goes to h8. King goes to h8, and then rook goes to h7, checkmate. This one is the Arabian mate. That's what that's called. And it's basically the king and rook team up to trap the opponent king on the corner of the board. Okay, that's that one. On to the next one, back rank mate. This one I knew. This one I could easily explain what it is. Back rank mate comes post castling when the king is basically stuck behind these, basically stuck behind these pawns. I reversed the colors here, but in this situation, the king's behind these pawns, and then the rook goes and checkmates the king on the back rank. For this reason, it's called the back rank mate, and this rook on c8 faces off against this king on g8. So this is a full checkmate, and that's called the back rank mate. That one I'd actually recognized. This is bishop and knight mate. Interesting. they consider this the bishop and knight mate is one of the 4 basic checkmates and occurs when the king works together with a bishop and knight to force the opponent king to the corner of the board. Okay, sure. So here in this situation, basically, it's kind of difficult to force these, but say in this situation, this sort of checkmating net had already been set up. This bishop and knight mate would occur after, say, this king is basically forced to g8 by the bishop on e7. Then the knight goes to h6, the king goes to h8, and the bishop checkmates on f6 on the king on h8. Cool. On to the next one. Next one's called a Blackburn's mate. All right. Blackburn's mate is named for Joseph Henry Blackburn. This is interesting. Basically, it looks like this is a very specific checkmate, but it utilizes two bishops and a knight. Can't remember this ever coming up in a live game, but this is an interesting situation. A case like this, basically, I would have to struggle to think about how exactly this could be forced. But say this king, basically this bishop is on a dark square, this king is on a light square. Maybe this king is here. I think this makes things a little bit easier. I'm trying to, or let's say instead the king is here, and the bishop is here. In this case, basically this bishop checks the king. This king goes to h8, and this bishop checkmates on c3. I think that fits the criteria. Basically, the definition I think is just this. Basically the combination of the knight and the 2 bishops here. But yeah, there's another one called the blind swine mate. Okay, cool. Here, this is the doubled rooks on g7 and h7. All right, this certainly comes up. So here, this would be called the blind swine mate. 2 rooks on this side, and king here. And then basically this king, this king with only 2 moves of access here, this rook checkmates it. So rook takes g7, king to h8, rook takes h7, king to g8, rook to g7 checkmate. So that's the checkmate there. 2 rooks forcing the king in the corner. Cool. That is called the blind swine mate. Next one is called the Bowden's mate. Interesting. And basically this is another one that, again, the great majority of these I never knew. It's the type of thing where, you could say it and sort of sound fancy. You could get the jargon right for it. But in terms of actually things that are practical, my experience is of this huge list of mates, the percentage of mates that I actually knew the name of was very small. Probably 25% or so, maybe less. But yeah, so if you want to play the Bowden's mate, you basically can play, this rook this bishop controls this set of squares, and then you move the other bishop to a6, and this bishop, basically creates checkmate threat from a6 onto c8, and that's another checkmate. Corner mate. I swear, I'm learning these, pretty much for myself. They're the names of these. I've seen all of these at various points, but the names of them is kind of cool. So this is the corner mate. All right, king's here, pawn's here, rook is here, and let's just say for the sake of things, this happened because this king was here. This is a somewhat less contrived situation. In this situation, rook goes to g1, king goes to h8, and knight goes to f7, and checkmates in the corner. That's called the corner mate. Works by confining the king to a corner using the rook or queen, and then blocking the final escape square, and then using a minor piece to engage in checkmate. Okay, so it didn't have to be the rook and the knight there, but it basically forces the king to the corner and checkmates using this this move to f7. Anyways, interesting. Next one's called the Damiano's bishop mate. Okay, utilizing the queen and the bishop. It's named after Pedro Damiano. Cool. I've seen this many times, never known what it was called. So in this case, basically using the queen and the bishop supporting the queen to checkmate on the side of the board. In this case, if the king goes to e8, then the queen goes to e7, checkmates the king, and that is called the Damiano's bishop mate. Cool. Doesn't have to be on the third rank, just needs to be the bishop and the queen working together to checkmate the king on the side of the board. Makes sense? This one is called the Damiano's mate as opposed to the Damiano's bishop's mate. And Damiano's mate is a classic method of checking and one of the oldest. Okay. Cool. So basically this is a more involved one. This one is definitely a tactic that I've seen before, again, not knowing what it was called. But this tactic can come up in the following way, basically. If you have if you basically have a king in a situation like this, what could happen potentially after post-castling and post a move like g6, and you have a rook on the rook file, what you can do is you can sack the rook on h8. The king takes the rook on h8. The queen goes to h3. The king goes to g8, and the queen goes to h7. And now it's a checkmate. So basically, you provided sort of clearance square for your rook on the rook file. So rook to h3, king to g8, rook to h8, king takes, queen to h3, king to g8, queen to h7. Never knew what that was called, but apparently it's called the Damiano's mate, and now we know that that is the Damiano's mate. The doubled bishop mate, okay, this one comes up. So it's classic method of checkmating, similar to Boden's mate. Boden's mate, by the way, we just looked at this a second ago. Boden's mate is the one where you use basically the two bishops in kind of an X-shaped formation. But yeah, instead, this doubled bishop mate uses the bishops that aren't aligned as an X, but are instead aligned as a basically covering all squares like this. So here, this bishop goes to d4. This bishop faces in on d4 to h8, and there's a checkmate there on the king. So basically, you move the bishop to d8, and this is these bishops form a doubled bishop formation, and it's called the doubled bishop mate, as opposed to what was the specific? Boden's mate. Okay. So cool. So more, again, like these are things that I never knew. I never knew what they were called. I've seen all of them many times in my life, but in any case, they're there. So this is called the dovetail mate. Okay, that's a really new one. I don't know what that is, but basically this looks like a complicated one that involves a specific pattern. I've definitely seen this, but basically it involves forcing your king to get checkmated by your opponent's queen in a structure where it's sort of obstructed. So like in this situation, basically, this queen is here, this queen is here, and it doesn't really matter what what the additional piece is here for black. It could be a rook, it could be a bishop, it can't be a knight, it could potentially be another pawn. But basically, they call this the dovetail mate. First, the queen goes and basically forces the king backwards. So this queen goes to h6, this king goes to g3, and then this queen goes to queen goes to h2, providing checkmate on the king on g3. And basically, this works because this king can't get out through any direction. The escape squares naturally would be f3 and g4. But because they're obstructed in this case, this pattern doesn't work. So here, this queen goes here. These pieces, arbitrarily they could be both rooks. It doesn't really matter. What really matters is that they're obstructing this king's escape squares. So here, queen to h6, king to g3, queen to h2. And this queen blocks off all the escape squares, and so do these two rooks that are obstructing its its escape squares on the white files. That's called the dovetail mate or the Kozio's mate. News to me, didn't know what that was called, but it is it is that. Cool. Interesting. There's one called the E Paulette mate. I didn't know what that was, but we will figure this out. King here, rook here. Rook here, and pawns say here and here. Sort of just going off of what the Wikipedia thing is, but a checkmate where two parallel retreat squares for a checked king are occupied by its own pieces, preventing its escape. So that could be rooks here potentially. I'm trying to think of what else it could be. Probably rooks is the way to do it. You could set it up in a position like this. This would be kind of interesting. If you had multiple pieces there. But basically, the idea is that the lateral moves for the king are blocked off. This is called the epaulettes mate. The one they have on the one they have on the Wikipedia page, that ends up being rooks. But this is a similar position where the queen is basically going to d5 and the king can't escape laterally in either direction. In this case, it also can't go backwards because the rook is guarding all of those squares. So that is called the epaulette mate. Okay, Greco's mate. Greco's mate is pretty common. I'd never knew that was what it was called, but it is something that comes up a fair amount. It's basically where if a lateral move for a king on the side, can't escape. So I think this one is sort of similar to okay, so it needs to be a bishop to fit that definition. So it's not similar to that first one that we were looking at, the one called Anastasia's mate. This bishop one, basically the bishop prevents the lateral move for the king, and then the queen basically goes to h4, checking the king and making that so that it can't escape on g8. This ends up being pretty interesting, good for white, and this is the Greco's mate. Okay, cool. That's what that's called. Interesting. Didn't know what that was. But on to the next one. Next one is let's see. The next one is called the hook mate. Hook mate involves the use of a rook, knight, and pawn. Okay, I've seen this. So basically here, you basically get the king into a situation where where you can move the rook and all the escape squares are blocked. So in this particular case, a way that you could set this up would be the king here, and the rook here. So this is called the hook mate, and basically, I guess they're saying it looks like a hook. You play rook to f8, you play king to d7, and then you play rook to d8. So yeah, basically, cool. So this is the hook mate. This is the checkmating pattern. Looks like a win for white utilizing this hook. Interesting. Cool. But yeah, so this is the hook mate. On to the next one, the kill box mate. Interesting. Kill box mate. All right. Let's see. So kill box mate is a box-shaped checkmate. Again, I didn't know what this was called. This comes up a lot in kind of bullet games where you're sort of playing for a check. Here, if you have a queen and a rook, what you can do is you can go rook to c6, king to b5, queen to c4, king to a5, and rook to a6. I know we've seen this position before. This is a kill box, called the kill box mate. Yeah, sure, you send whatever you'd like, Kira. Completely fine with me. But yeah, so kill box mate, another one that I didn't know the name of, but know now. King and two bishops mate. Okay, that one seems pretty straightforward. King and two bishops mate is what they were calling one of the four basic checkmates. I guess they were king and queen, king and rook, king and two bishops, and king, knight, and bishop are the four basic checkmates. But king, basically this mating square ends up being pretty easy to kind of understand. So in this situation, basically you can force the king into further and further diagonals. So bishop here, king here, bishop here, king here, bishop here. And that is called the king and two bishops mate. Didn't know that's what that was called, but that is what it is called. King and two knights mate, that is surprising that they would include that. Those tend not to be forced. There are probably contrived situations where you can force it, but generally, king and two knights mate is not something that you can kind of, basically that you can perform by force. This would be an example of one, I guess. Let me just see if I can come up with one off the top of my head, but maybe like this. Uh, this would be a king and two knights mate, but still, you're sort of using this bishop. Otherwise it doesn't work. If it's just like this, you can't really. I guess if this position occurred, you would be having a two knights mate, because here, knight, king there. No, actually, this still isn't forced because knight there and the king gets up through f7. So instead, this king is here. This knight plays here, and if this king makes the error to voluntarily go into the corner, which he shouldn't do, this knight can play to here, and it'll be a two knights mate. So that's the king and two knights mate, not a forcible one. This one, I guess, is called the ladder mate. I always thought it was called the rolling rooks mate, but that shows that they're calling it the ladder mate here, so that's something. And here in this situation, basically this involves having pieces that control full file, pushing the king into a smaller and smaller square. So here, rook here, rook here, king there, king there, king, rook there, king there, rook there. That would work. That is considered to be the ladder mate or lawnmower mate. I always thought this was called the rolling rooks mate. It was taught to me as the rolling rooks mate a very long time ago. But that's one of them. And then here's another one. This one is called the Legals mate. This one is called two knights and a bishop coordinate to administer checkmate. Alternatively, this bishop may be delivered by a bishop on g5. Interesting. I've always thought of Legals mate as being one where you kind of had a checkmate with f7 on the side of the board. But that's kind of interesting. Say here, basically, I always thought this Legals mate was bishop and two knights out of the Philidor. This one that they've got labeled as Legals mate, this looks like it can involve minor pieces, or basically just involves three minor pieces. So what I think of as the Legals mate, I always think of the Legals trap. I'll set up the Legals trap just because it's sort of interesting. That's what they're talking about here. In this game, I will, I'll start a new one. Here, the Legals mate can come out of multiple situations, but basically it comes out of the Philidors the most frequently. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, d6, knight c3, bishop to g4, and then here h3, bishop h5, and then interesting. So here they're basically saying the position that they use on Wikipedia isn't forced, but knight takes e5, bishop takes d1, bishop takes f7, king to e7, knight to d5. That is the Legal trap. Basically, this knight moving to e5 and letting the bishop take on d1. That's the Legal trap. So when I think of the Legal mate, I think of that trap. But they've also got some more, kind of less complicated ones here. We could try to come up with one just for, entertainment's sake. But bishop here, rook there, bishop there, king there, pawn there, and say a knight here, and then like a knight here or something. So in this case, you can basically use you can use your two knights to checkmate the king. So here, bishop to f7, king to e7, knight to d5, and this king is checkmated on e7. White's in a good position. White's better, and this ends up in a good situation for white. This is Legal's mate as opposed to Legal's trap, which is something that's more specific. But yeah, this is what I think of when I think of the Legal trap. Basically, these two knights and this bishop on f7 providing the mate to the king. All right, here's one called the Lolly's mate. Never heard of this one before, but it's named after a particular person named that. But this is very common. This is basically using a pawn and a queen against a castled king. These situations happen all the time. So yeah, for example, this could be, rook here, and then this king is here, and then the queen goes to h6, the king goes to g8, and then the queen goes to g7, checkmate. So here, queen to h6, king to g8, queen to g7, and this is a checkmate for white against black. So that's so that is called the lolly mate. Never knew that that's what that was called, but that is what it appears to be. All right. Max Lang's mate, using the bishop and queen to checkmate the king. This one I've seen a good amount. Never knew that that's what it was called, but I guess that is what it's called, so cool. And here, I don't know if it matters if it's more than one piece. Otherwise, I'm having trouble kind of figuring out how this would be forced. I guess this would work. So say like the queen is here or something, and the king is on h8. In this case, the queen goes to b8, the king goes to h7, and the queen goes to g8. And this is a checkmate of that king. That's called the Max Lang's mate, using the bishop with the queen for support. Interesting. Never knew that's what it was called, but evidently that's what it's called. So interesting. Um, I don't know. Some of them I've heard before, some of them I haven't. The Legals mate I know is at least based on a true story, but the other ones are new to me. They seem very specific, like it's like the Mayette's mate. But yeah, if you guys are interested, I'm sure you could just put yours in on Wikipedia. This article was overall very interesting to me. I don't honestly from a perspective of learning chess, I don't know how much helping learning the names helps, but in terms of learning how to talk about chess, I actually think that this could be pretty helpful. But yeah, no, look at all these names. I'm gonna share this link just because I think it's an awesome. Or oops, I left the link in. Let me send that again. But basically here, this checkmating pattern here, if you look at this, it's basically a game. It's a pretty cool page actually. I'm learning a lot from it, to be honest. So I'm kind of like, all good with it. Like it's actually it's actually pretty cool for me. Like I've been playing chess for so long, so it's kind of cool to know that like these types of situations are these types of situations basically work. So yeah. Here's an example: Rook to h4, King to g8, and then with the bishop defending the long diagonal here, Rook to h8 checkmate, and this is called the Mayette's mate. This involves the use of a rook attacking the king supported by a bishop. Cool. This definitely qualifies. That's what this is. Yeah, looks like a good win for white there with a Mayette's mate. Something that I've never heard it referred to, but cool. All right. So here is the Morphy's mate. I don't know if this involves a discovered check necessarily, but it certainly can stem from one. In this situation, if the rook takes on g7 here and plays rook takes g7, the king goes to h8. The rook takes f7. The king goes to g8. Here, rook to g7, king to h8, rook to g6, bishop to f6, bishop takes f6, and basically this ends up being a checkmate. This is called the Morphy's mate. Didn't know that that's what that was called, but it is. All right. Basically going along with that Mayette's mate, there's one called the Opera mate. The Opera mate, this Opera mate is a common method of checkmating. It works by attacking an uncastled king on the back rank using a rook, using a bishop to protect it. It closely resembles Mayette's mate, which it does. I guess it's based on a specific game called the Opera game. But yeah, let's take a look. So here, set up this position. King's here. Say, how do we best set this up? Pawns here, bishops here, pawns here. and then say we have like a rook or something like this. The rook plays to d2, rook to d2, king to e8, and then rook to d8, and that is the opera game. Similar to that Mayette's thing, where basically they're using the bishop supporting the king on the back rank, and using the rook to checkmate with some obstruction to the king's escape square. But that one is called the opera mate. I didn't know that that was what that was called, but that is something that I've definitely seen happen. Yeah, interesting. Next one is called the pawn mate. All right, so let's set that one up. We can do. I'm making these so that they're forced, or that at least the parts of the game that we're focused on are forced. But yeah, let's say here. Or I'll just flip the sides. Let's say here that your king is here on g3, and there's like a pawn here and a pawn. Wait, let's think about this. I like the way that the game set it up, basically, but say if this was the situation, then you sort of can create the situation by playing a rook to check the king. Rook goes from b7 to b4. King goes to g5, and then you play a6, checkmate. That is called the pawn mate, the David and Goliath mate. With the David and Goliath, this you're basically checkmating the king with the pawn. That's what that's called. I never knew that's what a pawn checkmate was called, but that's kind of neat. All right. On to the next one, Pillsbury's mate. Pillsbury's mate basically involves a discovery. This is a discovery threat. Pawn here, and rook here. And basically, I'm not entirely sure how you can force. Oh no, I guess you can force this, but you need the file to already be open. So here, bishop here. So here's mate in 3, rook to b8, so rook to b8, king to king to a1, bishop to b2, king to b1, bishop to c3, checkmate by the rook through this discovery. That's interesting. That's called the Pillsbury's mate. Didn't know that that's what that was called, but that's pretty cool. Queen mate is on to the next one. Queen mate is one of the 4 basic checkmates. Okay. Interesting. Of those, I'm sure that king and basically king and queen, king and rook, king and bishop, king and 2 bishops, and king, knight, and bishop are the 4. Basically with the, I think we all kind of know how to do this at this point. But queen to, e2, and this king is checkmated. Awesome. This is the queen mate. Provides one of the 4 basic checkmates. The next one is the Reddy's mate. Reddy's mate, famous method of checkmating. Checkmate is named after Richard Reddy, who delivered it in an 11-move game against Saviali Tartakower. Okay. But basically, it works by trapping the enemy king with 4 of its own pieces and then checkmating it on a bishop, with a bishop. It's hard to imagine how that could be forced, but we can try. So in this particular case, it would be something along of like rook. No, it's actually, these types of things are actually pretty tricky to set up. Pretty sure this one needs to be a pawn. Here, like here, rook here. Wait, I think it feels like it's 5, isn't it? No, it's 4. Right, okay, so these, basically this is the setup for this one. Where basically you're aiming to checkmate with the king on e8. So rook to e6. This king is blocking those squares, right? And then the king moves to f2. And then the bishop goes to e1. Okay, checkmate on the king. Rook is holding it there. Interesting. That is the Reddy's mate with the 4 pieces blocking the king's escape square. All right, rook or box mate. Never heard of it referred to as the box mate before. But say it's the rook mate here. The rook mate is fairly easy to force. In this situation, say, this king is trying to checkmate this king. You can go rook here, king here, move the king to the opposite colored square, rook here, king here, rook there, and basically eventually just execute the mate like this. Yeah, it is. No, it is. This is they're calling this one the rook mate, the box mate. Honestly, I sort of just wanted to go through these and like talk about it. This is a pretty basic lesson to be completely honest, but it had a lot of for a lesson that's extremely basic. It had a ton of stuff that I didn't know in it. Like knowing how to name all of these mates was never something that I actually knew. So like suffocation mate, swallow's tail mate, I know these are interesting. To me it's cool to learn anything new. But if you're checking out a mess, this is the page that has all of these patterns on it, and yeah, this checkmating, basically this checkmating pattern page has a lot of interesting names on it. I've never heard of most of these. Like, there's ones that I've heard maybe once or twice, like the Paulette mate. Like, I've heard that said, never knowing what it meant. But actually going to this page and memorizing the names of them, that's new to me. So I'm always happy to do lessons where I learn a bunch of stuff. Those are from my perspective, those are the best lessons. This is actually one where I've learned a lot of things. All of these names I basically didn't know. Smothered mate is one where I did know, but yeah, smothered mate, just so we know, is basically when the king is stuck in the corner. You can move the knight to block the king here. So like in this case, a quick knight to c2. Yeah, I got the AGM. I got the AGM yesterday. Thanks for asking, Matt. But yeah, I knew the smothered mate too. But yeah, knight to f2 and this checkmate on a1. But yeah, just since we're looking at cool stuff, let's look at the FIDE titles. What people don't know about FIDE titles is that they usually think that there's only 8 FIDE titles. There's actually at least 12, and I think there might even be a few more. But yeah, yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Here's what I think you guys should do. I think if you guys want to get on that, and you basically if everybody on the stream got like AGM or AIM or AFM or ACM, one of these arena titles, which I strongly believe that you can do. If you guys practice, I bet you can get like, at least an ACM title. ACM title is 150 bullet games with a performance rating of over 1100. I really think you guys can do this. Like, I think that there's many people who watch the stream regularly that could get to ACM on there. And then once people are ACMs, right now there's only 377 ACMs in the world. No, that you start at whatever your rating is. It's just, it's the same as chess.com where you have like a rating system. I think it's a little bit more difficult than the chess.com ratings. It's probably a little bit more difficult than the USCF or FIDE ratings, but the thresholds here are so low. Like, 150 bullet games with a performance rating over 2000, that's a very achievable goal for many people. And 150 bullet games with a rating of over 1100, that's an extremely achievable goal for many people. So right now, there's kind of an inefficiency in the market. You don't have to win, you just have to play them and have a rating above that level. If you guys want to show you, I can bring out the FIDE, I can show you guys the FIDE arena. But what I'm saying is, if you got, it costs a little bit of money. It probably costs $75 USD total, something like that. But if you're actually willing to sign up for this arena, you can get a legitimate FIDE title. Like, FIDE titles are something that people work their entire lives for, right? But you can get one almost immediately if you sign up for the FIDE arena and meet their criteria. So I have never had a FIDE title before, but now my FIDE title is AGM, yeah. If anyone's interested, this is a very good way to get a FIDE title. Seems like a big inefficiency in the market right now. So yeah, I think people should totally get their AGM, AIM, AFM, or ACM titles, and then we can talk to chess.com about making sure that all the ACMs can play in Title Tuesday. But yeah, I think so. I mean, I did it, so I think it's worth it. If it was a lot of money, then I would feel differently about that. But I would definitely feel good about I would feel good about investing that money. Like it seems like a good idea to me. So anyways, what I'm thinking is everyone here should get a FIDE title, and then everyone can ask chess.com if they're willing to let to put the title on people's chess accounts. That's an interesting idea. I don't know how that would work out, but if you want a FIDE title, FIDE basically has made it so that all it takes is 1100 over the course of 150 bullet games on the yeah, no, totally, Amet. I think it's totally achievable goal. I would strongly recommend getting in on that if you can. But yeah, for now, this is a goal that I think might be of interest to some people. Um, yeah, I mean, you'd have to figure out how to do it. I think Aphelions on track for it. But yeah, overall, this is an interesting thing, and definitely, check it out. I thought it was cool, so I was like, all right, well, I want a FIDE title, so I'll just get an AGM title, and then it took a minute, but I was able to get it eventually. We've only got three. We've only got 3 or 4 checkmates left. Let's just get through these, and then we can go to the games. This was the Smothers mate. The next one is the Swallow's Tail mate. All right. Um, let's look at the Swallow's Tail mate. This one is kind of unusual. I'm trying to think of how this could be forced. But basically, it works by attacking the enemy king, uh, basically protected by a rook or other piece, and then the enemy's king's own pieces block its means of escape. Okay, cool. We can work with that. Um, that sounds a little bit. That sounds a little bit vague. Like I just had a recent one where it was something similar to this too. Yeah, this one definitely comes up in that. But yeah, let's just say this king's here, this rook is here, this rook is here, and this rook is here, and the king's there and the queen's there. You can do this. A situation is basically where the rooks are going to be blocking the king's escape squares. So this queen can go to b3, the king goes to d2, and the queen goes to d3, and the king has no escape squares, so it's checkmate there. That is called the Swallow's Tail mate. I didn't know that that's what that was called, but that's what it's called. And interesting. So I learned that. They said it resembles the E Paulette mate. The E Paulette mate is kind of similar. I see the similarities, but it looks like the difference between an E Paulette mate, where the queen is basically checkmating the king by itself, versus the Swallow's Tail mate, is this basically this queen is supported by another piece. With the E Paulette mate, the queen's basically checkmating the king in isolation. Anyways, interesting situation. And on to our last one for the night. This is Vukovic's mate. I've never heard that said before, but I've definitely played this mate. This has definitely happened. And it looks like an example would probably... I think I can probably set up a forced situation. This does sometimes happen in like king and knight end games. What I've seen it most frequently is if it's white to move here, and then the king picks the wrong direction or is forced off of this direction. So say, like some random thing. Say it's here, like this rook is here, or something that blocks the king from going the other direction. If the king goes the same direction as the knight, the rook can be used as a checkmating resource. So here, knight to d3, and then the king has to go to d10, and then the rook goes to d2. This one happens from time to time. I've seen it a few times. But anyways, throughout the stream, we've gone through every checkmating pattern in the book. That is pretty interesting. There might be others with cool names, but honestly, I've learned so many of these. Like the blind swine mate, I've never heard of, but I've played it many times. And this the dovetail mate, I've definitely had situations known what that's called. So yeah, overall a really cool Wikipedia page. Get to play, get to play out all those mates, and learn the names of them. I like doing lessons where I learn a lot of stuff, and this one I learned a lot of stuff. I mean, I've heard of an E Paulette mate. That's probably the rarest one that I've heard of, but never known what it was. But this E Paulette mate, what that is, and that is interesting. Didn't know what that was, but now I do. So, anyways, a good set of games, a good set of checkmating patterns to learn the names of. Never knew those, but now I do. Now I guess I can talk chess at a reasonably high level, or whatever value I can get from learning the names of the checkmates. But yeah, those are all cool. They're all ones that I think enough experience you'll kind of recognize at least at some level. If you ever want to do a cool parlor trick, I'm sure you can bring out the names on those, and people will be impressed. Obviously, master level people don't necessarily know the names of those, so I bet you can get great mileage out of throwing them into your conversation. Interesting. Anyways, going on this, let's take a look at the games we've got for tonight. That was actually pretty interesting, I thought, though. To be completely honest, I didn't know the names of those, and now I do. The dovetail mate, that's interesting. So yeah, Determined Vision playing white here. Thank you for sending the game, Determined Vision. Determined Vision plays against the Petrovs. His opponent plays the Stafford. We've seen the Stafford a lot. The Stafford at the end of the opening, or basically at the end of the exchange, is down by about a pawn and a half for black. So white's gonna be playing with tailwind here. This should be good. Knight to c3, bishop to c5, bishop to e2, h5, d3. And basically here, white should be all right. White looks like he's about up a pawn, so he's got a lot of leeway to work with. This is a situation where, Stafford opening gets kind of the the aggressive attacking that he's shooting for. White's I don't know, to be completely honest. I don't know. Anyways, objectively speaking, I think that it surprises no one that this puts white up by about a pawn and a half. In the normal Petrovs, say a Petrovs where knight takes and then d6 is played, and then knight to f3. This tends to be a lead of about 0.8, 0.6, 0.7 for white. So white's good here. White should be up by about half a pawn, should be up by a good amount. This is but with the Stafford having been played, white's up by about 1.6 pawns. So it loses about a pawn. That's about right. I mean, this e5 pawn's worth about a pawn, and that's what black gets for not that much compensation. So knight plays to g4, bishop takes, and white getting this knight off the board, playing bishop takes knight was worth it. You're exchanging your good squared bishop for the knight, but you're up a pawn, and black has a worse pawn structure. So just stuff off, I'm sure, is an effective way to get things off the board. Bishop takes. So better here was rook to h5. Rook to h5, and then so here rook to h5 was considered to be best. Rook to h5 is going to allow kind of attacks on the castled queen side for black. Bishop takes c3, and then rook to b5 should be pretty good for black overall. But yeah, on bishop takes f2, queen takes f2, white's just sailing smoothly. This is all good. White's gonna win, basically up a piece, and should win this game. So yeah, good situation for white, and yeah, white's up good, solid, I don't know. It basically at least a piece by the time the position simplifies and turns it into a winning endgame. In terms of improvements for white, I think your opponent gives you a pretty good look. Bishop takes, pawn takes, and now I think you can play like standard developing moves. Bishop to e3 is playable here, as is queen to d2, as is queen to e2. Bishop to f4 is fine. Just any developing moves, anything to kind of move things forward, and you're good. The bishop, and one improvement for white, this bishop could have taken on c7. Instead, castles. Bishop takes c7 was a better move for white. But overall, white takes this advantage of a piece, turns it into a full advantage of a rook, and wins the game. I don't understand bishop takes f2, but I don't know. Bishop takes f2, and basically white's doing just fine. No issues. So yeah, interesting situation. No problems, and white's able to convert a pretty solid win. Good stuff. Good win for white. Improvements, just basically the hanging c7, but otherwise I think you've got a pretty solid win against the Stafford Gambit. Stafford Gambit, I don't think we can really say is a particularly. I think it is a fun opening to play, but I don't think it's a particularly strong opening to play. I think that you'd be hard pressed to find people who think it's objectively that good, but it can be a lot of fun, and I think the fact that it is fun is why it's appealing, and that's fine. You don't have to play in an optimally perfect way to find chess fun for you. Um, uh, yeah, maybe that might have been the thought. But the bishop takes c7 seemed like one of the main improvements for white there. All right, here we've got the Elephant Gambit. This is pretty interesting. Elephant Gambit is an interesting opening. In the Elephant Gambit, there's a few different ways that white can play it. Both are pretty good for white, but they're pretty dangerous. We can maybe, if we have an extra minute or two, we can take a look at both of them. So e takes d5. On e takes d5, I've seen bishop to d6 is played by black the most frequently. On d5, e takes d5. e4 is also playable. On e4, queen to e2, knight to f6, and basically things are holding together pretty well for white. In terms of eval, I'm sure white has like more than a pawn lead. Sacrificing your center pawns is a big cost to pay. That's a lot. It's difficult to win when you've given up a center pawn for no compensation. Not impossible, and there are tactical situations where you can get good positions, but it's a pretty high barrier for entry. Anyways, going on this, e4, e5, d5, knight takes d5. That's pretty, that's a playable move too. That's the other side of this. Knight takes e5, and then bishop to d6, I bet is still the most common. Not sure if that's what was played here, but bishop to d6 is a pretty common move in this opening. So bishop to d6, d4, pawn takes e4, knight to c4. And honestly, all this memorized theory, is probably something that you should have a good handle on if you're playing this opening as black. But overall, I think black's just gonna end up being down a pawn. Not terrible, but not ideal. So yeah, I assume it would be 100, to be honest. I'm not sure exactly how that works. I've seen situations where people have played book moves until their opponent like hung a queen or did something like that. I think those end up being pretty close to 100%, is my memory. I don't think the accuracy score applies on book moves. But yeah, e4, e5, d5, bishop to d6, and here white's winning. Pawn takes, knight to c4. Let's look at the opening book here, because I sort of feel like we might want to learn the opening tree here. Knight takes, bishop d6, d4, d takes e4, knight c4. All of these have been the most commonly played moves. And here the more commonly played moves are bishop to e2, bishop to g5, and knight takes d6, followed by queen takes d6. Basically here black's looking fine. No issues, and this is basically a pretty equalized game. Black, if you look at this is a gambit line where white gives back the pawn almost immediately. Basically, black loses the e5 pawn, but takes white's e. A little bit difficult for black to defend his e4 pawn than it is for white to defend his d4 pawn. But overall, I think this should be a pretty good situation for black. This is certainly a playable game. Black's hope is to, I think, get very aggressive attacks on on h2, frequently using d6 and sometimes including bishop takes h2 and knight to g4. But here, I think, in an equalized position, white just has a slight initiative, and it's sort of a straightforward and playable game. Queen to e6 is an error. Let's see. On queen to e6, the knight can play to e3 and basically force off this bishop. If the knight can force off this knight for this bishop, two knights in what's basically an open position, that should be good for white. And knight to e3 here, rook to e8. And basically, I don't know. I mean, white's looking fine. The real advantage for white, or the real opportunity for advantage for white, was in getting the better minor piece set. Bishop c4 is also good, but white basically makes the mistake in trading off this knight. Once this knight is traded for this bishop, white's really just has a much more limited positional attack. Moves that are a lot scarier here can include f3, which would lead to pawn takes f3, rook takes f3, rook to g3. And just basically look at this position. In this position as white, white has key advantages here that I think he needs to exploit. Ideas include queen to h5, f3, rook to g3, but basically black's kingside is both open and isolated from the rest of the board. So I think that basically, if white capitalizes on this, he should be fine. So queen to h5 is good, and other than this, white should be all right. No real issues. This hangs a piece, I think. Queen to h3 looks really dangerous. Let's take a look at this queen to h3 tactic. Queen to h3, queen to a5, queen takes h2, king f1, queen to h1. And basically this king can go to e2, the queen takes on e4, and the rook is one for black. So yeah, I think in terms of looking at situations, or how could black have improved in this game? Playing the elephant gambit to start is probably going to give your opponent an initiative. Maybe 0.75, but on correct opening play, something about 0.75. Not overwhelming for white, but sort of dangerous. Castles, knight to c6, c3, bishop to f5, and basically black's doing fine. Positions holding together, no real issues. I think better for black might have been queen to e6. That keeps things sort of centralized. The issue here is that bishop to g5 can be comfortably played, and then knight to d4, knight to e5 has a posting opportunity potentially. But yeah, allowing this bishop to be played on c4 was not so good. Better moves, I think, would include, I don't know, bishop to g6 is what the engine is suggesting. Knight to e7 followed by knight to d5 on the so let's see this knight to e7 line, bishop to c4, and then queen to g6 or wherever, queen to b6. This knight defending that bishop is pretty good. But yeah, overall, this should be good. Should make sense. The bishop more active? What is more active, the bishop or the knight? It depends on the exact situation. Hey Eric, welcome. Thanks for joining the stream. So yeah, so basically here, white's got an advantage of about 4 pawns here. Knight takes, queen takes. So here, I think that this, this trade leads to White losing a lot of his advantage. But I don't think it's because this bishop is particularly weak or that this knight is particularly bad to give up. It's basically this, this queen gets to go to h5, this rook gets to go to f3 and g3, and White will end up in a good situation with attack going on the king side. So in terms of what's more active, it depends on the exact situation. But I can say that, even though the engine hates knight takes f5 here, it doesn't hate it because of the relative values of this knight and this bishop. It hates it because of the relative values of, it hates it because it slows down White's attack on the king side and White's ability to attack on the king side. So overall, very interesting. Not yet. Good question. I think it's on my list, Eric, but it's not for tonight. I'm putting out the schedules for tomorrow. I bet it's in tomorrow's games, but yeah, it's not for tonight, Eric. But you're welcome to stay and watch and to take a look at these games. So yeah. D5, bishop d6, and once this simplifies, it becomes basically an equal time. Yeah, it also brings the queen forward. So let's look at this trade. Once this bishop takes f6, Black's king side is very weak here, Ahmet. So this, this open file on this king is really a problem for Black. But once the knight takes and then the queen takes, this queen blocks basically all the squares that White could have used to come in on. This queen is now in exactly the right situation to defend, to defend attacks. So this open file is way less of a problem. Here, things are still very awkward for Black if he plays f3, rook to f3, rook to g3. This is a much better way for White to go about this. f3. Rook takes f3 and then pressure on the king side using the rook and the queen. That's better. That is I think a stronger way for White to play. And but yeah, so if the knight takes bishop moving the queen forward, that's not particularly good. Yeah, that's basically why the eval shifted. So what I'm saying is, the eval here is plus 3.66. And then the knight takes, and then the queen takes, and the eval shifted from 3.66 to 1.65. So basically a 2-pawn shift. So it's a big positional change when queen to h5 stops being playable. So yeah, that was really what happened there. And after this, I think that basically that Black is fine. White still has somewhat of an initiative, but it's not like it's anything particularly dangerous for Black to deal with. Anyways, this queen to h3 earned a double exclam. That's cool. Queen to g2 is getting threatened. And this ends up drawing. But interesting, double exclam move. That might fit the criteria of double exclam. There's a very specific computerized criteria of what makes things a double exclam move. Here, I think king g7, rook to e5. But basically, Black's looking fine. There's no real issues here. But yeah, you're exactly right, Ahmet. That was the question. Why did the eval shift? It's because queen h5 was no longer possible. So yeah, we can take a look. Improvements for Black in this game. I think that Black needed to kind of, find a better route of maintaining this knight on f6. Knight e7 is getting suggested here. On knight e7, bishop takes f6, pawn takes f6, knight to, and then knight to g6 if a defensive resource is needed. But actually getting the... hey, thanks, Sour. I'll give you the link to the Discord. The Discord is right here. But just basically put the game in the game submission section of the Discord. But if you join the Discord, Sour, feel free to post a game, enter a game into that. into that channel, the game submission channel, and it'll be on the. I'll confirm it, and it'll be on the stream within a few days. So yeah, feel free to send a game, Sour. Thanks very much for joining the stream, and feel free to send over whatever you like. So yeah, knight to e7 is better than queen to e6 here. Queen to e6 just sort of gets stuck over in the middle. Probably knight to e7 is better. Yeah, pawn takes, queen takes, and basically white's up by a little. When white could have been up by a lot. Let's look at like the most aggressive attacking lines for white. Say here, 3.66 edge, that's pretty big. F3, king h8, and then basically the knight is advancing, the pawn takes e4, and then the rook is going to get involved in this game. But white's going to maintain this pretty big solid advantage, get his rooks involved, and even here down a piece materially, right? Although, yeah, so say queen to g6. Down a piece materially, white is still up 3 pawns. On, like, say, bishop to g6. I guess part of this operates off the fact that there's a pin on the bishop on f5. But overall, this looks better for white. This is stronger for white, and this should this should be a win. So I don't know. I guess the better idea for black here was to just basically let this bishop trade off for the f6 pawn. You know, you're worsening your pawn structure, but you're getting the superior minor piece and taking away white's bishop pair. Makes sense. And in terms of other improvements in this game, I thought it was pretty intuitive, most of it. King to h8 isn't necessary yet. Better than king to h8 was probably like a more positional move. f5 could have been an idea, but king to h8 it doesn't really solve anything. It lets white move forward at the cost of a tempo, and given how open this king side is and how compromised this king safety is, compromising a tempo here is kind of a rough situation for the king. So black doesn't really have a tempo to spare. So king to h8, which isn't the necessary move at this point. This is just done. This is done with the idea of king safety in mind, but it's not a particularly effective move. The tempos here are worth almost a pawn. The eval goes from plus 1.25 to plus 2.25. So I think black needs to play something more purposeful, probably f5 and then f4. Something better for black here. But yeah, cool. Yeah, perfect. All right, so I see you just joined the the stream or the Discord, Sourbomb. Just go to the game submission section and send your game. I'll confirm it by the end of tonight, and it'll be on the stream in a couple days. Yeah, rook e1, f5, and black is looking fine. Yep, no issues. Honestly, I feel like white needed to cash out for more here. Also, rook takes e4 and queen to h3 was an opportunity for black. So of all the changes in this game, the most decisive one was queen to h3. Queen to h3, and white doesn't really have an effective move for dealing with things. Queen to h3, queen to a5, queen takes h2, probably. Queen takes h2, king f1, queen h1, and then the rook gets 1, basically by pushing the king in between these rooks. So that was big, and that ends up being a big improvement for black. Slightly earlier, queen to h3. But yeah, just going front to back, and we'll conclude and go on to the next game. Elephant Gambit is a risky opening. It's fine and it's interesting. It's good for a surprise attack. I've seen it work out very well for people. But no, that didn't happen in the game. So I was just going to go front to back on this and show you what happened. So knight to e7 is fine. Knight to e7, and you'll still have a piece to fill this file, either the bishop or the knight. So giving up this knight and doubling your pawns isn't particularly bad for your king safety. So knight to e7, bishop takes, and you can still play bishop to g6 or knight to g6. And the rook, the knight file on the king side is not going to be open the way that it is right now. So that's slightly better for black. So that's better than queen to e6. That's the first change that I'd make for black in this game. And then I think black plays reasonably efficiently. I think king to h8 was kind of a waste of a tempo. That didn't really help black in any way. Better off was like f5 or something that has a more purposeful, a more purposeful reasoning behind it. King h8 was just kind of a passive defensive move that wasn't particularly helpful to black. So yeah, rook to h3 or rook to h6. Sorry, again, I guess I have mixed feelings about this one. Rook to h6 does successfully advance this. Attack. The engine, just so we know, is proposing b5. I acknowledge that queen to f5 is a problem, and the engine also acknowledges that queen to f5 is a problem. But rook to h6 is not the preferred way of solving it. The engine is proposing b5. That makes sense. b5 also really isolates this queen on the queen side. If the queen can't get back in over here, so that ends up being good for white. And overall, this ends up being just fine. Rook to h6 ends up being okay. But the big opportunity, the real decisive thing here, was queen to h3, and then white's best defense is something like rook to e8. On rook to e8, king to g7, basically, I think mate might be coming. I don't know, say like queen to c5. On queen to c5, queen takes h2, and then you still have the same pushing the king to e2 and rook takes e1. So overall, this was a big opportunity for black in what had been a relatively quiet game. The earliest queen h3 could have been, basically this could have, essentially saved black's game here. Queen to h3 is a threat that white can't deal with effectively. There's nothing that white can play that can deal with queen to h3. King can't go to f1. Maybe the rook can't go to e3, because if the rook could go to e3, then theoretically the king could go to e2 behind the rook and maintain the defense on the rooks. But after queen to h3, there's not really much of a way to hold everything together. This is good. Plays out well for black. And white settles for a draw. So, I don't know. I guess settling for a draw there probably wasn't right, but there were a number of decisive things for black in this game. Starting with knight e7 over queen to e6. Then also king to h8 was not as purposeful as something like f5 or even like queen to d5. And then h3 really was available as a winning tactic right at the end. So between those three, I think you have a few different things to note in this game. But overall, interesting, and always happy to see more theory out of the Elephant Gambit. I honestly feel like the Elephant Gambit, as they go, is underrated as a surprise attack. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying that it is, it is interesting and playable. So just keep that in mind. It is an interesting gambit. Not playable as something that you play every time probably, but something that you can throw in once or twice and get a surprising win over a highly rated player. That's the context I've seen it used, and I've seen it used effectively for that. Cool. So so thank you very much for sending the game. This is Sumia Deep's game. Okay, knight c3, bishop to c5. This is basically an English opening. Bishop c5 is probably not the best here. Bishop c5 is well down the list. Let's take a look. The criteria I always use is whether or not it's played more or less than 1% of the time. Second criteria is, basically, does it shift the eval by over half a point versus the best option? I think here we're just short of that half a point. But I do think that based on this eval and based on how infrequently it's played, we can say, this played 34 out of 34,000 games, so it's played about 1 out of every 1,000 games out of this English formation. It sort of doesn't really make a lot of sense. It kind of runs into the same problem that bishop to c4 does in the Sicilian, where basically e3 is going to provide a very effective defensive resource that this bishop's going to be on a disrupted diagonal for the rest of the game because of. So yeah, if the bishop is played to c5 before e5 is played, you can always respond to it with e3 here or e6 in the Sicilian. And this bishop has gone from being moved to a good diagonal to being stuck on a bad diagonal, and that's an important part of this position. It tends after e4 that characteristic's no longer there. Then bishop to c5 is fine. White wouldn't have the same defensive resource, but here white can just play e3 and make bishop to c5 look inefficient. Okay, g3, and then we have a pretty crazy move. Bishop takes f2, shifts the eval towards white by about 3.5 pawns. That doesn't really make a ton of sense, but that's okay. White is cementing his lead. He's up by about 5 pawns here. And yeah, this is all tactical play. In terms of learning how to do this better, I strongly recommend doing a lot of tactics training. Tactics training on chess.com or tactics training on Chess Tempo. All of those are good. Great options for improving your game. Strongly recommend them. And chess. Those types of games, are really good. A good way to improve your game overall. Chess Tempo, Chess.com Puzzle Battle, Chess.com Puzzle Rush. You do need a tactics trainer, I think. I think if you want to improve as efficiently as you can, you do need a tactics trainer, and you do need to, spend a good amount of time on it. White executed pretty well. I don't think there was too much in the way of errors. There's some slight inefficiencies here and there, but overall, I just think this is kind of a bad opening for black. I don't think that black should be playing bishop takes f2 on move 6. It just doesn't make much sense to give up that much material for no reason. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Pawn takes d5, pawn takes e5, and white advances these pawns. That's a good tactical idea. They're calling knight f4 an inaccuracy, but it doesn't really matter. You're up 4 pawns or 5, whatever. And yeah, I just think you kind of slowly walk this in, to be honest. I don't think there's much to do except just clear off all the pieces. White's up by about 5, and yeah, this ends up playing out great. I looked at it. I think it's good. I think it's good. Random. The Lee Chess tactical resources are just fine. I haven't used them a whole lot, but I've used them enough to say, feel free to use them. Like they're as good as Chess.com's tactical resources. I use Chess.com just because I have kind of a lucky membership on there. But yeah. The Lee Chess tactical puzzles feel more than welcome to use those. Those are great tactics trainers too. I haven't gone through and done like Puzzle Storm versus Puzzle whatever the very specific ones, but yeah, their overall tactics programs on there. They're fine. I am very comfortable sending people to use Lee Chess for their tactics training as opposed to Chess.com. Free option is often better. That said, I have good kind of infrastructure to basically stick with the ones that I've got, or what I have already. But yeah, no, for sure. No, it's a good question. Looking at Lee Chess, I'm totally open to that as a possibility. Welcome. Yeah, thanks for joining, Tebow. Appreciate it. Yeah, no, interesting. But yeah, thanks for stopping by, Tebow. We were on it. To be completely honest, we were just sort of wrapping up, anyways. But yeah, this game with the bishop sacrificed on f2, that's not going to be playable. If we're looking at this opening, let's take maybe 2 minutes to look at this opening. Most common responses for black: knight to f6, knight to c6, d6, bishop to b4. These are all fairly standard, fairly standard situations to get a good opening position out of. But against the English, this is just kind of not that great. So yeah, knight f6, bishop to b4, knight to c6, d6. But bishop to c5 is well down the list, and it objectively runs into this e3 problem. If it didn't run into the e3 problem, it would be a better move. It would be a different move, but yeah, playing your bishop to a diagonal where it's going to be, where it can be very easily be set up to bite on, a closed diagonal. Yeah, so bishop takes f2 obviously doesn't make sense. This is not a good idea. But yeah, at the end of this, not much. I guess I would say there's not much there. Black gets a few good ideas off. Knight to f2 is cool, but the amount that Black has already paid for this compensation, which is not really all that much more than an open king, this was not a good plan for Black. But I just wanted to show kind of I think the most instructive parts of this game are just looking at the opening. Bishop to c5 is bad, and it's bad for the reason that you can play e3. And now this bishop is on a diagonal where it basically can't go anywhere on this diagonal. If it was on e7, it would be able to go to 3 squares successfully right now. Here it's able to go to 1 square successfully. So e3 turns this diagonal into something that's pretty useless for Black, to be honest. So overall, that ends up looking pretty rough. I don't think there's much there, and White just ends up solid. I don't know. I mean, interesting. It was an interesting try. I'm always in favor of interesting tries, but this full piece sacrifice, this ends up being pretty weak for Black. Just not a well conceived idea, to be completely honest. So yeah, that leaves us in a pretty interesting situation. White just wins. This is an earlier win maybe than some others, but relatively good tactical play by White. Pretty aimless play by Black, and basically this game was over by about move 6. I don't know what to say about that, other than don't do things like this. They're not a good idea. They may get you a quick win from time to time, but not, at a higher level chess, players are going to be able to deal with this kind of thing pretty easily. So yeah, I wouldn't put all the, I wouldn't put too much stock into an early piece sacrifice. It's just kind of weak. Anyways, interesting situation, interesting plays, and overall, Jen was nice enough to make some new emotes. I think there's a tempo and there's a free one, but they're really cool. I like them a lot. It was super nice of Jen to make them for me and be supportive of the stream. I like them. They're on there, and feel free to use them. But thank Jen. I don't know if she was on. She was on earlier, but those are very cool. I like them, and it was nice of her to make them. So yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap up for the night. That's Jen, by the way. Jen made a Jen emote. But yeah, I think I'm gonna close out for the night, and we can call it a day. But I'm about to put up some schedules for tomorrow. We'll learn exactly what games and what things are gonna happen during this weekend streams. So yeah, feel free to check the Discord. The Discord's got the games on there, or is gonna have the game schedules on there. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you guys. Next stream is at 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. The stream after that is at 9:35 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. And feel free. Thank you very much for being here. Thanks for participating, and thank you for sending the games. I appreciate it. Have a good night. I will see you tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.